I remember the acrid smell of burnt metal long before I recall the rush of pain that coursed through my body. The swirling haze of memory begins on Valtiz 4, a remote mining colony where my platoon had been stationed. A dull assignment, or so I believed, until the skies tore open. The Skreth descended upon us in thunderous waves of chittering claws and beating wings. Within minutes, the familiar outpost I patrolled daily was transformed into a nightmarish battlefield. I am Kaela, a scout for the Vareen Defense Forces, and I had never before encountered the Skreth. We had heard rumors, of course, dark whispers about a warlike insectoid species spreading chaos across the frontier. But rumors rarely matched the terror of reality. The first wave tore through our perimeter with devastating force. Our lines crumbled beneath an onslaught that seemed endless, the creatures pouring forth from their drop vessels in fractal swarms. Heavy lasers tore at our bunkers, screeching mandibles rent flesh, and I watched the best soldiers in my squad vanish in pillars of black smoke. I fought. I did what I was trained to do. My specialized armor, designed for infiltration, offered scant protection in the open. But I had no choice. The Vareen Defense Forces had entrusted me with the vantage to spot infiltration points. Only we never anticipated anything like this. I remember flipping the visor down, checking the heat signatures, and seeing a sea of seething red blotches. The entire horizon glowed with Skreth life signs. Then the artillery began. We had only a handful of operational cannons left, but we fired them. The blast sent the Skreth screaming backward in uneven retreats before they regrouped and advanced once more. My fellow scouts signaled for evacuation. I heard them over the comms, desperate and hopeful. But the escape ships never arrived. All we had was a skeleton crew of transport vessels, and the Skreth shot them down in moments. We were alone. Flares of memory catch me in half-conscious glimpses. The roar of an explosion, the taste of blood in my mouth, the rancid stench of charred carapace. At some point, debris pinned me against the wreckage of a communications tower. My entire left side went numb. Clusters of Skreth scuttled past, indifferent, laser stingers and spindly limbs glinting in the flickering flames that covered the colony. Darkness closed in. My last coherent thought was a simple, desolate realization: I was going to die. Then came a flicker of light. Ships entering the atmosphere that were not Vareen and certainly not Skreth. Their thrusters cut bright arcs through the black sky. I thought them illusions conjured by a dying mind. Explosions rang out. More shrieks. It was as though an unseen force had descended from the heavens to annihilate our foe. The ground quaked with new bombardments, and somewhere in my final moments of awareness, I felt strong arms, hands in unfamiliar gloves, lifting me from the rubble. I slipped into unconsciousness, convinced that if death was a dream, it was one of thunder and fire. When I next opened my eyes, I was convinced I had actually died. The medbay around me was pristine, walls the color of polished steel, recessed lights glowing with a gentle, bluish hue. The overhead hum of environmental controls whispered an alien lullaby. My injuries ached, yet the pain was dull compared to the throbbing agony I'd felt on Valtiz 4. I attempted to sit up. My vision swam, and an alarm chimed softly. A shadow moved over me, and a face appeared, lean, with angular features, stubble across the chin, and concerned brown eyes. "You're safe," the figure said in a low, comforting tone. "Lie back. Breathe." He wore a uniform I had never seen, dark gray with a stylized silver emblem over the left breast. Across the collar read the name E. Mercer, and below it, a distinct insignia, a small golden planet encircled by twin rings, the emblem of the Concord fleet. The man gently placed a stabilizing hand on my shoulder, easing me back onto the medical cot. I stared up at him, too startled to speak. Human. I recognized the species from universal profiles, but I had never spoken to one in person. After a moment, a medic, also human, arrived at his side, scanning my vitals and adjusting the infusion lines. I watched, mesmerized, as the device beeped and projected readouts into midair. The technology was advanced, more refined than any gear I'd encountered in the Vareen Defense Forces. "Where am I?" I finally managed, voice cracked from thirst. The man, Captain Elias Mercer, as I would soon learn, gave me a reassuring smile. "Aboard the starship Odyssey. My crew found you on Valtiz 4. You were barely alive. His words echoed in my mind. Memories rushed back. My squad, the hopeless fight, the looming wings of the Skreth, and those ships that broke through the gloom. They had saved me. But why? A question formed on my lips, but I lacked the strength to voice it. My eyelids fluttered closed, the sedative or fatigue dragging me into a new tide of sleep. As I drifted away, I caught Mercer's warm gaze fixed upon me, and in those final waking moments, a sense of profound gratitude and confusion washed over me. For the first time since the terror on Valtis 4, I felt safe. Chapter 3: The Strangeness of Humanity. Over the next few days, I slipped in and out of consciousness, each time growing a bit stronger. Medical monitors beeped in calm, rhythmic intervals. With each awakening, I discovered something new: the human's gentle manner of care, the advanced regrowth patches that mended my torn flesh, the soft voices that spoke reassuring words I didn't understand. Eventually, I mustered enough strength to sit up unaided. My limbs quivered, still recovering from the trauma, but I was determined to learn how I had survived. That was when Captain Elias Mercer returned, stepping into the med bay with a certain quiet poise. He asked if he could sit. I nodded, uncertain of human customs, but keen to show my gratitude. "You're healing well," he said. "Our medics say you can begin mild physical therapy soon." "Thank you," I whispered. My voice still sounded weak, but it was the only phrase I could muster that conveyed something of my deep appreciation. He nodded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I studied him as discreetly as I could. Humans were said to be varied, both in appearance and temperament, and Elias Mercer seemed a man shaped by adversity, but tempered by compassion. The uniform he wore was worn in some places, the insignia bearing scuffs that told of countless missions. I cleared my throat. "I'm Kaela. I served, in the Vareen Defense Forces." He offered a slight smile. "We suspected as much from your armor. We're part of the Concord fleet. Some might call us a coalition of Terran colonies and allied species. Our mandate is peacekeeping, rescue, and humanitarian aid when we can." My confusion must have shown on my face, because Mercer's smile grew apologetic. Humanitarian might not be the best term to use with non-humans, I suppose. But we try to help wherever possible. Our intelligence indicated Valtis 4 was under threat. We dropped in at the last moment. I recalled the Sea of Skreth, the hopelessness of that battle. "You saved more than me." He sighed. "We saved who we could. The Skreth left so little behind. We're sorry for those we couldn't reach." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. It puzzled me. While the Vareen were not cold or cruel, our alliances had always been pragmatic. We rarely risked ourselves for strangers. Yet here were these humans, traveling vast distances to aid a remote world they had no direct stake in. "Why?" I asked softly. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because we can. Because we have a responsibility to help others when we're able. Our histories back on Earth taught us the cost of indifference." I let that sink in. We always heard humans were intense. I never expected such altruism. His eyes flashed with a self-deprecating humor. "Some call it altruism. Others call it meddling. Regardless, you're alive, and that matters to me." Silence followed. The rhythmic hum of the medbay's life support instruments filled the gaps in conversation. I found myself unexpectedly comforted by his presence. And though my body ached, and the memory of the Skreth haunted me, a spark of hope took root. Perhaps all was not lost. 3 weeks passed in a liminal blur of medical treatments, quiet contemplation, and cautious steps through the corridors of Odyssey. My injuries forced me to learn to walk again, assisted by a slender metal cane and the watchful eye of Lieutenant Reyes, a no-nonsense but compassionate medic who oversaw my therapy. The humans were diligent, ensuring I had everything I needed, from specialized protein supplements to mental health check-ins meant to keep me centered after the trauma I'd endured. During one of these sessions, Mercer appeared unannounced. He leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, a half-smile on his face as Reyes guided me through balancing exercises. "You're looking stronger," he observed when my session concluded. I nodded, feeling the flush of exertion on my cheeks. "The human's technology is impressive. I'm grateful." Mercer gestured toward the corridor. "Care for a walk? We can go slowly." Lieutenant Reyes gave me a nod of approval, and I followed Mercer into the hall. The corridors of Odyssey were softly lit, with luminescent strips lining the floor. The overall design was utilitarian, but not without subtle touches of elegance. A potted plant from Earth in a corner alcove, meticulously polished wall panels reflecting the starfield beyond the portholes. We walked in silence for a time, my cane tapping lightly against the deck. My eyes took in everything. The crests denoting engineering, the hangar bay signs, the occasional passing crew member who nodded to the captain with respect. It struck me how seamlessly these humans worked together, each with a distinct role, each evidently trusted to do their duty. Your Vareen customs, Mercer said eventually, are different from ours, I imagine. I considered. In many ways, we don't have the same interstellar traditions. Our alliances are more localized. We tend to rely on trade partnerships and mutual defense treaties, but rarely do we intervene on behalf of distant colonies unless it serves a strategic objective. He glanced at me. We're not so different. The Concord was formed out of necessity, to stave off existential threats. Still, we push ourselves to help, especially when no one else will. I slowed, leaning on the cane. My muscles still ached from underuse. Could you have left me behind? I asked, though I wasn't sure why I voiced such a question. His lips thinned. We almost did. We arrived late, found only devastation, and your vitals barely registered. But you were still alive. For us, that's enough reason. His earnestness shook me. In the Vareen forces, efficiency was paramount. A soldier found near death on a distant battlefield might be labeled a lost cause, especially if rescue risked additional lives. But these humans had risked themselves for me, a stranger from a race they scarcely knew. We ended our walk at a large observation window. Beyond it, space stretched in infinite majesty. A swirl of faint pink nebula dust glimmered in the distance, a cosmic tapestry of color. I want to return to Valtis 4, I said abruptly, to see if anything remains. Mercer's gaze hardened, not with displeasure, but with understanding. We're making preparations. We intend to help rebuild if possible, or at least provide relief. But it's still dangerous. The Skreth might return. A ripple of fear crept up my spine. The memory of chittering legs and slashing blades lingered. But a deeper resolve sparked. I have to do this. My squad, my friends, are gone. I owe it to them to see what remains. He nodded solemnly. Then we'll go together. It's part of our mission. A sense of purpose took root. This was what I needed. Closure, a chance to honor my comrades. And so it was decided. Odyssey would return to Valtis 4, and I would stand with them, however I could. 2 weeks later, I stood on the bridge of Odyssey as it dropped out of faster-than-light travel into Valtis 4's orbit. My posture was steadier, supported by a leg brace rather than a cane, and I wore a borrowed Concord Fleet jacket over my old Vareen uniform. The new attire felt strange, like stepping into a different world, but it symbolized the synergy I was beginning to share with these humans. Sensor sweep, full EM spectrum. Mercer commanded from the captain's chair. His gaze never left the forward view screen, where the burned sphere of Valtis 4 slowly rotated. Any sign of Skreth ships? Commander Nabin, a tall, taciturn woman with sharp eyes, ran her console readouts. No sign of active vessels in orbit. Surface readings show multiple pockets of radiation, possible leftover weapon signatures. Small pockets of life in the southern hemisphere. Hope flared in my chest. Survivors? We'll dispatch recon drones, Mercer continued, and prepare a landing party. As the hum of the engines shifted, I stood rooted to the deck, memories stirring. That planet below was once a place I patrolled daily, exchanging banter with fellow scouts, carrying out unremarkable but stable tasks. Now it looked ravaged. Even from orbit, black scorch marks blemished the once lush surface. The mining colonies were scattered across the southern continent. In the images relayed from the drones, I spotted craters and collapsed structures where the outpost had once stood. Within hours, the first rescue shuttles descended through the smudged sky. I joined Mercer's team, stepping onto the shuttle ramp with a swirl of emotions swirling in my gut. Commander Nabin coordinated from orbit, ensuring we maintained contact in case the Skreth staged a return. The shuttle's engines flared, and we dipped into the planet's atmosphere. What I saw upon landing broke something inside me. The terrain was scorched, the outpost barely recognizable. Twisted girders, half-collapsed walls, stunted vegetation coated in ash. The wind blew with a mournful whistle through the wreckage. This was Valtiz, for in the aftermath of monstrous aggression. And yet, hidden among the debris, we found the living. Human medics rushed to treat them, distributing rations and water. Huddled families, their faces gaunt and eyes sunken, emerged from concealed shelters. Some recognized my Vareen uniform and collapsed into tears of relief. My heart constricted. We had failed them once, but perhaps I could help now. As the day wore on, Odyssey's crew brought more supplies. Swiftly erected tents dotted the clearings, forming a makeshift relief camp. I circulated among the refugees, conferring with local leaders, some of whom wore the same uniform as I had before, though tattered and bloodstained. They recognized me, embraced me, and told me of the horrors they survived. Night fell, and in the glow of portable floodlights, I glimpsed a fragile camaraderie forming between the battered Vareen colonists and the determined human rescuers. On the edge of the camp, I found Mercer overseeing the distribution of thermal blankets. He looked tired but resolute. I watched as he bent down to wrap a blanket around an elderly Vareen woman. She clung to his arm, murmuring thanks in a halting voice. The sight humbled me. Here was a man from a species known for ambition and conquest. Yet what I saw was compassion incarnate. I approached after the elderly woman was guided to shelter. Mercer turned, wiping sweat from his brow. "They've lost so much," he said quietly. "Yet they still fight to survive." "They do," I said, my voice thick. "I want to help more. Show me what to do." He nodded. "Stay close. There's much to be done." And so we toiled together, forging the beginnings of hope amid a sea of devastation. In that moment, I realized that survival was not just about living. It was about rebuilding something better than what came before. With each passing day, the relief efforts grew more organized. Engineers from Odyssey worked side by side with Vareen survivors to restore limited power to the battered infrastructure. Medical tents overflowed, but the humans introduced advanced triage techniques, saving countless lives that would otherwise have slipped away. I volunteered wherever needed, distributing food, comforting the traumatized, assisting in salvage operations. One evening, just after sunset, I saw a young Vareen child, no more than 5 cycles old, wandering near the perimeter. She stared at the broken horizon with wide eyes. I knelt beside her, offering a gentle hand. "What are you looking at?" I asked softly. She blinked, tears forming. "I keep thinking the monsters will come again." I gently guided her away from the scorched craters, promising that if the Skreth returned, we would protect her. But her trembling shoulders spoke of a fear lodged too deeply to be banished by words. That night, as the camp settled into restless slumber, I found Mercer in a temporary command post. Maps and sensor data glowed across portable screens. He glanced up as I entered, exhaustion etched across his features. "Any sign of the Skreth?" I asked. He shook his head. "No confirmed sightings. But we've intercepted faint signals. Could be residual chatter from their retreat." A pang of dread coiled in my gut. The Skreth were not known for half measures. If they retreated, it was to regroup or target a new location. "We have to be prepared," I said. Mercer nodded. "We are. Odyssey's scanning the region around the clock. If they approach, we'll know." I wanted to believe him. Yet in the quiet hours, when the wind carried the distant moans of survivors, I feared the worst. An anxious energy spread through the camp. The humans' presence reassured many, but the memory of the Skreth assault was too raw. Despite our vigilance, the blow came unexpectedly. A storm was brewing over the horizon, clouds swirling with unnatural speed, crackling with weird energies. Our meteorological instruments blinked warnings. In the confusion of battered equipment, we almost missed the first flicker of Skreth ships descending through the rolling thunder. When the alarms blared, I was helping a Vareen mother find proper medical supplies for her sick child. The ground vibrated with the resonant hum of sublight engines. My heart plummeted. Could we fend off another attack? We had one Concorde starship overhead, a handful of ground-based turrets, and many exhausted refugees. Yet the humans did not panic. Mercer and his officers sprang into action. "All units, defensive positions. Evacuate civilians to the shelters." The relays of command spread swiftly. Marines in Concorde armor rushed to man the perimeter, joined by the few Vareen soldiers still capable of fighting. I grabbed a pulse rifle from a supply cache, ignoring the protests of a medic who reminded me I was still recovering. This was my home, my people. I would stand with them. Thunder rolled across the blackening sky. Rain began to fall in sheets, turning dust into thick mud. The wail of sirens merged with the hiss of precipitation. And then we saw them, elongated shadows moving across ridges of twisted rock. Skreth drones, skittering forms with spiked limbs and chittering mandibles. They came for us, unwavering in their lethal intent. Laser fire erupted. Odyssey soared overhead, turbo lasers flashing, scything down clusters of Skreth as they advanced. But the Skreth spread out like a black wave, using the terrain for cover. Our perimeter shook as they returned fire with stinging blasts of energy. Refugees cowered in the shelters, some screaming as stray shots ignited the tents. I found Mercer by an outcropping of collapsed rubble, barking orders into his comlink. Rain soaked us, plastering hair to our faces. "Kaela," he shouted over the din, "we need to hold them off until Odyssey's ground teams reinforce us." I pressed against the rubble, rifle clutched in trembling hands. The wave of Skreth grew closer, their clicking vocalizations rattling my nerves. Lightning slashed across the sky, illuminating their insectoid forms in flashes of ghastly detail. "You saved me once," I said, breath ragged. "But now we stand together." He offered me a fierce grin. "We're in this together, till the end." Then the storm swallowed us in a chaos of light and sound, each second a harrowing dance with death. But the humans fought with unwavering resolve, their lines refusing to break. The Vareen defenders, inspired by the unexpected allies, rallied behind them. In that crucible of thunder and scorched metal, we began to drive the Skreth back, inch by bloody inch. Dawn broke in a haze of smoky orange, revealing the toll of the battle. The ground was littered with Skreth carcasses, black exoskeletons cracked and smoking from laser impacts. Our own casualties were not insignificant. Nearly 24 refugees perished, and among the defenders, we lost a handful of Concord Marines and Vareen volunteers. The triage tents overflowed with wounded. Yet we had held. The Skreth withdrew before first light, likely to regroup once again. Although we had won this engagement, the cost weighed heavily on us all. I dragged my weary body through the makeshift infirmary, assisting medics wherever possible. The air smelled of disinfectant, charred metal, and fear. Whimpers from the injured punctuated the silence. My own wounds, though superficial this time, pulsed with pain, but I shoved it aside to help. Near the end of my shift, I found Mercer slumped against a supply crate, a bloody bandage around his left forearm. He looked up, eyes reflecting exhaustion and relief in equal measure. "Captain," I said, kneeling next to him. "Let me get a medic." He shook his head. "I'll be fine." Yet his pallor told me otherwise. A piece of shrapnel had pierced clean through his arm. The dressing was soaked through with fresh red stains. "Just give me a moment to catch my breath," he added. Despite his protest, I waved over a combat medic. We carefully removed his bandage, revealing a deep gash that would require stitches, or the human equivalent involving some regenerating gel. While the medic worked, Mercer's gaze locked onto mine. "That was good work last night, Kaela. You held the line." I shrugged, exhaustion making it difficult to speak. "I did my duty to the people here, but it was your example that kept them from fleeing." He exhaled. "We lost people, good people." "Yes," I said quietly. "But more would have died if you hadn't fought so tenaciously." His eyes gleamed with a mixture of sadness and pride. "Concord's mission is to protect. We stand, even if it means we bleed." I helped the medic seal the wound with an advanced adhesive patch, the bright swirl of healing nanites glimmering around the edges. The technology amazed me yet again. Back in the Vareen Defense Forces, we lacked such refined medical miracles, relying more on conventional surgeries and regenerative therapies that took far longer. As the patch set, Mercer grimaced. "We'll need reinforcements. The Skreth won't stop." "Is that even possible?" I asked. "We're out on the frontier. Are there other Concord ships within range?" He shook his head. "Not close enough. We'll send a distress call, but it might take weeks for the nearest vessel to arrive." A heavy silence settled between us. Valtes 4 had become the front line of a conflict we barely understood. The Skreth's motives seemed as foreign to me as the humans had once been, though now I had come to rely on the latter for my very survival. Then we hold, I said finally. We hold until help arrives, or until the Skreth learn we won't abandon this colony. A weary smile touched his lips. I appreciate your resolve. Believe me, the people here appreciate it too. We clasped hands, his large, calloused palm enveloping my smaller one, and a silent promise passed between us. The next days would be crucial. No matter how battered we were, we refused to yield to the shadows looming on the horizon. Over the next few days, the Skreth made no overt move. Our scouts combed the surrounding hills, discovering only empty hollows where the insectoids had once nested. Whether they'd retreated to their ships or burrowed deeper underground, no one could say for sure. Despite the eerie calm, we used the lull to fortify our defenses and tend to the wounded. A sense of camaraderie blossomed among the Vareen and humans. I saw refugees attempting to learn fragments of Earth languages in exchange for teaching the humans basic phrases of the Vareen tongue. Engineers on both sides collaborated to erect more robust energy shields. Technicians rigged salvaged components from destroyed Skreth drones to boost our scanning range. In each act of unity, hope surfaced, as though we might rise above the tragedy if we stood side by side. One evening, I found Mercer alone by a flickering console that served as a temporary communications hub. A faint hiss of static emanated from the speakers as he attempted to patch a signal through to the Concorde's nearest command station. The glow from the screens highlighted the fatigue etched into his features. "Any luck?" I asked. He shook his head, pressing a hand to his temple. "Our signal's too weak. The subspace relays in this region are damaged. We might get a partial message through if conditions improve." Silence fell between us. Outside, the sky had turned a deep violet, stars shimmering beyond the haze of atmospheric dust. I recalled nights on Valtis 4 before the invasion, when I would stare at those same stars, longing for excitement, for something more than routine patrols. I had found excitement, far more than I ever wanted. Unexpectedly, Mercer powered down the console, sighing. "Come on," he said. "Let's take a walk." I followed him through the battered outpost. Despite the destruction, there was a stark beauty under the starlight. We climbed a small ridge of collapsed structures until we reached a vantage point overlooking the relief camp. A sea of small lights shimmered below, tents, portable lamp posts, the glow of engineering rigs. Beyond them lay the blackness of the cratered plains. "It's almost peaceful," I murmured, arms hugging my borrowed jacket against the cool breeze. Mercer nodded. "Hard to believe a war raged here just days ago. The quiet can be unsettling." We lingered, listening to the faint murmurs of the camp. I found myself glancing at him, remembering the man who carried me from the brink of death. "I still don't fully grasp why you risked so much to help strangers," I admitted. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "Humans have a saying, 'No man is an island.' We survived our earliest eras by banding together. Over centuries, that principle grew, extending beyond borders, beyond Earth, and eventually beyond our species. It's not always unanimous, and we've made many mistakes, but we strive to do better." His words settled in the hollow of my chest. The concept was foreign to me, but undeniably alluring. We Vareen operated under a code of honor. Yes, but altruism for its own sake was not typically part of our doctrine. "Perhaps I envy that," I admitted softly. "We Vareen are proud, but pride can isolate." "It can," he said gently, "but it can also inspire. Your people fought bravely when the Skreth attacked. If the circumstances had been reversed, I'm certain you would have done the same for us." I wasn't so sure, but I appreciated his conviction. For a while, we simply stared at the horizon, the hush of the wounded planet filling the gaps in conversation. At length, Mercer turned to go. "We should rest while we can. Tomorrow, we begin searching for hidden Skreth bases." My pulse quickened at the thought. We had staved off one assault, but the true challenge remained. Where were the Skreth regrouping, and when would they strike again? Bidding him good night, I lingered on the ridge a moment longer. I closed my eyes, inhaling the sense of scorched earth and distant pyres. Then I turned toward the camp below, returning to the tenuous hope that these humans brought. In them, I saw a reflection of what I wanted to be, someone who would not abandon others, even in the darkest hour. At dawn, reconnaissance teams spread out across the charred landscape. I joined one such team, traveling in a hover transport outfitted with scanning equipment. Our mission: to locate the Skreth's underground tunnels or hidden staging areas. If we could find them, we could potentially strike first or block their infiltration routes, buying time until reinforcements arrived, if they ever did. The hover transport hummed across rocky plains pockmarked by craters. Seismic scans indicated large cavities below, formed by ancient lava tubes. The Skreth, with their insectoid physiology, favored subterranean networks, so we suspected they might have retreated to these depths. We disembarked near a jagged fissure in the earth. The opening led into darkness, the mouth flanked by crumbling rock. A faint whiff of stale air wafted out. Armed with rifles and portable lighting, we descended carefully. The tunnel was claustrophobic, the walls slick with condensation. Odd bioluminescent fungi clung to cracks in the rock, casting eerie shadows. As we ventured deeper, the echoes of dripping water and shuffling footsteps seemed amplified, each sound a potential Skreth ambush. Suddenly, our scanning device pinged, a cluster of life signatures ahead. My heart hammered. We signaled to each other, extinguishing lights and switching to low-visibility optics. Inch by inch, we crept forward until we reached a large cavern. The scene that greeted us was like something out of a nightmare. Partial Skreth husks lined the walls, those that had been killed in the prior attack, presumably dragged here by survivors. Black filaments laced the ceiling, forming a grotesque tapestry of residue. Pools of congealed fluid littered the ground. Yet only a handful of living Skreth drones remained, apparently wounded, clicking softly among themselves. They looked disorganized, perhaps leaderless. We exchanged tense glances. One of the humans mouthed, "Take them." A silent nod passed through our group. The ensuing firefight was brief and brutal. Our pulses flared, rifles spitting energy bolts in rapid bursts. The Skreth drones, slow to react, fell quickly, their exoskeletons shattering under concentrated fire. An eerie silence followed. Cautiously, we examined the chamber. It seemed the Skreth had used it as a temporary triage or hive extension. We found fragments of stolen equipment, likely salvaged from the outpost, but no sign of higher-level commanders. At the rear of the cavern, half hidden under debris, we discovered something unexpected, a large console of advanced design, definitely not Vareen or human. Dim lights blinked on its surface, the controls shaped for spindly Skreth appendages. A sense of dread and curiosity gnawed at me. A tech officer from Odyssey, a thin-faced man named Corporal Tavish, began scanning the console with a handheld device. "This might be a Skreth communications node," he whispered. "Could be controlling their local swarm." I glanced around, adrenaline still coursing. "Can we disable it? We can do better than that. If we can hack it, we might glean intelligence on their larger plans." With that, Tavish set to work. We held a defensive perimeter around him, half expecting Skreth reinforcements. The process was nerve-wracking, minutes stretching into what felt like hours. At last, he let out a triumphant exhale. "I've accessed fragments," he said, eyes glued to the flickering readouts. "It appears the Skreth took heavy losses here, but they're waiting for a bigger fleet. Something about a final purge of loyalties, to wipe out all survivors, then moving deeper into the sector." My blood ran cold. If a larger Skreth fleet was inbound, Odyssey alone might not be enough. We had to warn the Concord, the entire region, that a new wave of destruction was imminent. We downloaded as much data as we could, then rigged a charge to destroy the console once we were done. After retreating a safe distance, the explosion reverberated through the tunnels, collapsing the cavern in a shower of rock. Our mission complete, we hastened back to the surface, hearts heavy with the knowledge of what awaited us. A storm was coming, one that would require every ounce of courage from Vareen and human alike, if we had any hope of survival. We rushed back to the outpost, where Mercer and the others awaited our report. The expression on his face grew darker with every detail Tavish relayed. At the mention of a larger Skreth fleet, I saw his jaw clench. "We have to bolster our defenses immediately," he said, pacing inside the command tent. "Nabin, coordinate with Odyssey in orbit. Prepare for the possibility of a planetary-scale attack." Commander Nabin's voice crackled over the comm. "Understood, Captain. We'll initiate orbital scans for any incoming fleets. The shield generator is nearing full capacity. We can cover roughly half the settlement. Half, Mercer repeated, though he already knew the answer. The generator was never designed to protect an entire colony, just a designated zone. Outside, the atmosphere was tense. Word spread among the survivors. Fear and determination mingled as we prepared for the worst. Defenses went up around the perimeter, and the humans' advanced sensor arrays scoured the skies for the first sign of the Skreth ships. Night fell again, with the camp lit by a patchwork of floodlights. I found Mercer near the newly reinforced barricades, scanning the horizon. The silhouettes of watchtowers loomed, manned by Concord Marines and Vareen volunteers armed with whatever weapons they had salvaged. "Hey," I said, voice soft, stepping beside him. "Any sign?" He shook his head. "Not yet, but we have to assume they're coming." Lightning flickered across distant clouds. The smell of ozone drifted on the wind, reminiscent of the storm that had accompanied the Skreth's last assault. I leaned on the barricade, quietly wrestling with the churning dread inside me. "I can't shake this feeling," I admitted. "Like no matter what we do, we're outmatched." His eyes shifted to me. "Perhaps, but we can't simply give up." "I won't." Heat flushed my face. I felt an unexpected surge of emotion. I can't go back to who I was before. I used to think the galaxy was a cold place, that everyone fended for themselves. But you and your crew showed me another way. He offered a small, weary smile. "You've shown us something too, Kaela. Your willingness to fight for your home. For these people, it's inspiring." My chest tightened. I still feel like I failed them. If only my squad, if only we'd been prepared. He squeezed my shoulder. "You can't blame yourself for the Skreth. We do what we can with the hand we're dealt." Silence stretched between us, charged with the unspoken tension of impending doom and unacknowledged feelings. Before either of us could speak again, a call echoed from a watchtower. "Unidentified vessel incoming from low orbit." The tension snapped like a taut wire. We sprang into action, sprinting for the command post. The sensors confirmed it. A small ship, perhaps a Skreth scout. Lights across the camp flickered to battle readiness. Teams scrambled to firing stations. Fear pounded in my chest as the roar of engines grew louder. Then, unexpectedly, the ship broadcast a message. "This is the Arrowhead, Concord registration. Requesting clearance to land. We have urgent supplies and reinforcements." A wave of relief swept through the camp. Reinforcements, maybe not the entire cavalry, but a chance. Mercer quickly authorized their landing. Moments later, a sleek corvette touched down, ramp hissing open. Out stepped a squad of Concord Marines, followed by an officer who saluted Mercer sharply. "Captain Mercer, sir. We received fragments of your distress call. We brought what we could, medical supplies, a few more squads, and an upgraded shield generator." That night, the atmosphere shifted from despair to guarded optimism. While the Arrowhead's reinforcements were modest, they represented a lifeline. If we could integrate the new shield generator and combine forces, perhaps we could hold off the Skreth invasion long enough for a second wave of Concord support. But beneath the flurry of renewed hope, I sensed the weight of an impending crescendo. Our battered colony was about to become the stage for a final clash, one that would test every bit of resolve we could muster. The next day dawned with a strange hush, as though the planet itself held its breath. Clouds loomed overhead, swirling with an eerie violet tinge. The Arrowhead's engineers worked tirelessly to merge their shield generator with the existing system, expanding coverage to nearly the entire settlement. Meanwhile, scouts reported sporadic Skreth sightings at the distant edges of the region. Late in the afternoon, the sensors picked up multiple incoming vessels. Skreth warships, their signatures unmistakable, dropping out of FTL just beyond Valta's 4's atmosphere. Alarms blared throughout the camp, civilians hastening to shelters under the protective dome of the new shield. Defenders manned the barricades, artillery positions, and watchtowers. Orbital scans from Odyssey confirmed the worst, at least half a dozen Skreth cruisers, accompanied by swarms of fighter craft. The assault began without ceremony. Bombardment rained from the skies. The newly enhanced shield flared, straining against the barrage. Over comms, Commander Nabin relayed frantic updates as Odyssey danced among the Skreth cruisers in orbit, trying to draw fire away from the ground. The Arrowhead took flight, launching a salvo of missiles that lanced up through the atmosphere, clipping at least one Skreth cruiser and forcing it to retreat. Then the ground invasion started. Skreth drop pods slammed into the plains outside the settlement. The defenders tensed. Waves of chitinous warriors poured forth, accompanied by towering forms with specialized energy cannons integrated into their forelimbs. Our perimeter erupted in firefights. Smoke and plasma flashes turned the day into a surreal, strobe-lit nightmare. I found myself again at Mercer's side. Despite my healing injuries, I refused to remain in a shelter. The battered pulse rifle in my hands felt like an extension of my determination. We rallied squads of Vareen and Concord Marines, bolstering weak points in our line. The Skreth hammered us relentlessly, screeching war cries that reverberated in the swirling dust. The shield generator took hit after hit, flickering under the onslaught. I heard engineers screaming over the comm for more power. The Odyssey soared overhead, unleashing precise blasts on the densest Skreth formations. Explosions rocked the ground, showering debris in every direction. Still, the invaders pushed closer. Eventually, a breach opened in the southwestern sector. Mercer cursed. We sprinted across the settlement, weaving through half-collapsed structures and scorching beams of energy. By the time we arrived, Skreth warriors had already penetrated the interior. A frantic melee erupted among tents and supply crates. I fought with everything I had, pulse rifle bucking against my shoulder. Adrenaline dulled the throbbing pain in my leg. All around me, humans and Vareen battled as one, shouting encouragement amidst the chaos. A Skreth warrior lunged, spiked forelimbs slamming into my rifle, knocking me to the ground. Terror seized me, but in that split second, Mercer's sidearm barked, blasting the creature's head into fragments. He offered me a hand up, and we pressed on. One by one, we sealed the gaps in the perimeter. The cost was high. Too many fell, their screams lost in the roar of artillery. Overhead, at least 2 Skreth cruisers began descending, likely aiming to crush us by sheer weight of numbers. The shield flickered dangerously. My chest constricted as I realized we might be nearing our final stand. Then, a sudden whoosh overhead. Through the swirling clouds, an entire wing of Concord fighter craft roared into the fray, launching torpedoes at the descending Skreth ships. Debris rained down in molten streaks, and over the comm channels, we heard the impossible. Concord reinforcements have arrived. Multiple capital ships inbound. A cry of relief and exultation erupted among our defenders. The Skreth, caught in a pincer between the new arrivals and Odyssey, faltered. Their lines broke. Some retreated to drop pods, attempting to flee. Others fought to the death, hissing defiance to the very end. Within hours, the skies above Valtiz, for were dominated by the Concord fleet. The battered settlement, though ravaged, still stood. Exhausted, smoke-blackened, and drenched in sweat, we watched as the last Skreth forces vanished into the blackness of space. The final blow had been struck. Valtiz, 4 was free, at least for now. In the aftermath, the camp resembled a patchwork of triumph and tragedy. Concord capital ships in orbit ferried advanced medical teams and supplies, and the shield generator was stabilized. The wounded were tended to, the fallen honored with solemn rites. I found myself limping through the ruins, assisting in identifying the dead. Each name called out was a reminder of what we had endured. In time, I came upon Mercer near a newly erected memorial. A simple stone slab etched with the names of those who had perished defending Valtiz 4. He stood in silence, shoulders bowed under the weight of command. The memory of his stony determination in battle contrasted with the vulnerable man who now mourned his comrades. I approached quietly. He noticed me and nodded in greeting, eyes rimmed with fatigue. For a moment, words failed us both. Then he placed a hand on the memorial's surface, tracing a name. Lieutenant Adams. He saved my life on that final push. His voice caught in his throat. A good man. I placed a hand on his forearm. I'm sorry. He exhaled slowly, blinking against the sting in his eyes. It's the price we pay sometimes. But it never gets easier. A hush fell over us, broken only by the distant hum of a Concorde drop shuttle. The colony would rebuild, slowly, and the survivors would carry the scars of this conflict. For my part, I had a decision to make. Remain on Valtiz 4 or move on with the humans. A stirring inside me told me my old life as a simple scout was gone. The experiences on Odyssey, and the bond one shared with Mercer and his crew had changed me irrevocably. At length, we walked together through the camp, checking on survivors. We found a battered but resolute population determined to reclaim their world. Concord engineers offered advanced terraforming expertise, along with invitations to join the broader coalition. The Vareen among the survivors hesitated, unsure what place they might hold in this new order. In the days that followed, I wrestled with the same question. Mercer would soon depart with Odyssey, leaving behind a contingent to help with reconstruction. When he offered me a place aboard his ship, I hesitated only briefly. Valtes, for no longer held the same meaning. My squad, my old life, all were gone. My future now seemed bound to the path that had begun when the humans rescued me. We stood on the flight deck as cargo was loaded. The Odyssey's engines hummed in preparation. My heart pounded. This was it. A final farewell to everything I had once known. Are you certain? Mercer asked quietly, double-checking the cargo manifests. This is your home. It was. But a lot has changed. The future I want, it's with the Odyssey and maybe with the Concord. If you'll have me. His expression softened, a warmth kindling in his eyes. We'd be honored. I looked back at the bleak horizon one last time, remembering the flicker of flames, the screams of my dying comrades, the unconditional help offered by these humans. And then I followed Mercer up the ramp, stepping into a new life. The Odyssey soared away from Valtes, leaving behind a world scarred by war. Despite the victory, the loss weighed heavily. Names echoed in my mind. Friends, comrades, and strangers who gave everything to hold the line. On the bridge, I took a seat near the viewport. Captain Mercer stood at my side, silent and pensive. Outside, the starlight was cold, a testament to the harsh realities of the galaxy. We had triumphed at great cost, but new threats would arise, as they always do. For a while, neither of us spoke. Words seemed inadequate. All we had was a mutual understanding, a kinship born of shared sacrifice. As the Odyssey turned toward the next mission, my eyes closed against the mounting grief in my heart. Was it worth it? The question lingered like a whisper in the hush of the bridge. Perhaps it was the only choice we had. With the memory of Valtes etched into my soul, I vowed to fight on, to ensure no one else would be abandoned in their darkest hour. In that promise lay the faint ember of hope, flickering in the vast night, reminding me that even amid sorrow and loss, we carry forward.